Well, hi, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library. Thought I'd do a tag today. I actually was going to do a tag yesterday and got busy and was kind of tired yesterday morning and just didn't feel like doing the tag yesterday. So last night I was watching a BookTube video while I was waiting on my wife and child to come out of the restaurant. We went and ate some Chinese last night, and so I was waiting on them to come out, and I started watching Steve Donoghue's tag he did yesterday, and it was the personal rules for reading tag, and I found this very, very intriguing, so much so that I was going to do the video before it was actually a tag. I had been watching last week Michael K. Vaughan and Mark at Book Time with Elvis, and they did a rules for reading video, and I found them very intriguing. You know, I took some notes on that, on some stuff they said, and then I came up with a couple more notes of my thoughts, and I was going to put my hat in the ring, and then lo and behold, it becomes a tag. So long story short, I'm going to do the tag, and this is kind of a neat tag. It was weaponized by MJ at Reading This Life, and it was turned into an open source tag. So we've got 4 original questions, and then as people do the tag, you can add questions to it. I thought that was kind of a neat concept, and at this point, I'm going to do those 4. Criminale added 1, Steve Donoghue added 2, and I may add 1 at the end, depending on, just how long the video gets. I might add 1 on to this list of questions. But anyway, it was a very intriguing video, just talking about your personal rules for reading. How do you feel about different things? Do you have suggestions for readers? What works for you, what doesn't work for you, that kind of stuff. And like I said, I thought it was pretty intriguing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get the questions started. So the very first question is, do you strive to read every day? If yes, do you do anything different or special to make this time within your day? If no, why not? And so do you strive to read every day? For me, yes, that is a big yes. I strive to read every single day. I try to read every single day. And just like Michael K. Vaughan said, one of his personal rules was, if you can read, you should. And I found that very intriguing. I like that because it is definitely I don't want to call it a privilege, because I think everybody should have the chance to read. But once you get that skill, I think it should be exercised. And, as a teacher, that makes sense. You're probably saying, well, duh, of course you're going to say that. And I'm going to answer yes, because I find it to be that important. I think that the foundations of world civilizations is based on the ability to read and write, and and be able to pass on information. So to me, that's extremely important. And so I do strive to read every single day. I'm not saying I am perfect at it, but I really, really do try. And so for me, how I go about doing that is I have just carved out a special time in my day, every single day, that it is undisturbed. Nobody could bother me, because everybody's upstairs asleep. Now, lucky for me, I'm an early morning person. My wife is a night owl. I'm an early morning. The early bird gets the worm. That's how I feel about things. And so for me, when I get up about 4 o'clock in the morning every morning, and I know that's not going to work for everybody, because not everybody's body works that way. They need their sleep. I get that. But for me, I'm an early bird, and so I get up about 4 o'clock, 4:15, right in there. This morning was quite a bit earlier because I could not sleep. Side story. Don't drink pop when you get old. Don't drink pop at like 7 o'clock at night. Yeah, anyway, signs of getting old. So anyway, been up for quite a while. And so I've had a lot of time to think about this, this tag. So anyway, get up at 4 o'clock every morning. I make my coffee. I drink a couple cups of coffee, and I drink my coffee slowly. I like to, sip and enjoy it. And so as I'm sipping and enjoying it, I read my books. and I really like to read my nonfiction in the morning because that's when my mind works the best. That's when it's the clearest. Late at night, I've found I read fiction because my concentration level is not always there. And I don't know how to say this without offending people, but I care more about my nonfiction than I do my fiction. Sorry, it's just that's my taste for books. And so I want to use those first hour and a half to 2 hours of the morning for what I care about the most, which is my nonfiction. And so then in the evening, that's my pleasure. Well, my nonfiction is my pleasure reading too, but my less serious reading for myself is my fiction. And so I do that in the evening, and that is not necessarily every night. Sometimes I'm just pooped by the time I get home and I don't feel like doing it, and I'll watch a little TV instead. But I have been trying to make that a habit again. I've been working at that. So anyway, I do strive to carve out an hour and a half to 2 hours of nothing but quiet time in the morning where I read. But in addition to that, even if I wake up and I'm just not feeling it that day and I'm not reading, I still have to read throughout the school day as I teach. It's whether I'm grading papers and reading kids' their work that they've handed in, or if we're doing readings in class, or if there's various ways. I read throughout the day. I have no doubt about that. And our school has a SSR time, 20 minutes silent reading. The kids have to read, and it can be something they're working on in class, or it could just be a free reading book. That's up to them, but they have to be reading because we deem it that important. And I'll come back to that in a minute. That reading time. Well, actually, I could talk about it right now. Carving out that reading time is extremely important if you're wanting to become a reader. Studies have shown, and I should have pulled up the studies so I could give you the exact names, but studies have shown that kids who, that people that read every single day, especially like with kids, their test scores are higher. They tend to do better in their classes, in their grades, their tests. And then if you look further into the study, they tend to do very well later in life as well. And there's lots of studies to back that up. I should have printed them out. I didn't, but it is in my eyes a proven thing. The studies have proven that reading every single day helps you in your academic life, and for me also it's important because for me reading can definitely be a stress reliever. I absolutely love to just sit down and get lost in a book. Now there are times when your back is against the wall and you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to get this book done? I got to get it done by such and such time. Or like I'm going to be taking a class on the presidency and political parties. Got a one-day seminar for the history teachers that I'm hoping to, or not that I'm hoping, I'm signed up for, that they gave us over 200 pages of primary documents that we need to go through before the next couple weeks is done. And so now my back's against the wall, and I know a couple hundred pages isn't that much, but when I've got all these other books that I'm reading and then that on top of it, so sometimes it's stressful, but most of the time I like getting lost in a book, whether it's fiction, nonfiction. So yeah, I answered that question. Let's go on to number 2. So number 2 is, do you always stay within your genres, or do you experiment with reading different genres and subgenres? I primarily stay within my nonfiction, but with that being said, I also read fiction, and I have been, if you've been following the channel over the last couple years, and I could give a lot of credit to BookTube for this, I have been stretching out into other genres. I've been reading, I know I like watching mysteries, and so I started trying to read mysteries, and I've really gotten into, I really like those, and so I've been, going into different mysteries. I've dipped my toe into science fiction, which, 2 years ago I would say never, and I am enjoying that. And again, it's just my toe. I haven't jumped in head first, but I'm enjoying the little bit that I'm reading. I have not tried like fantasy or anything. That might be one I'm going to try in the future. But I guess the whole point is I have been trying to read outside my comfort zone. And I have been listening a whole lot more to, like, when I'm at school, my fellow teachers, they don't read nonfiction like I do. And so when I suggest books, they typically do... Okay, half the teachers, maybe that's what I should say, half the teachers don't take my nonfiction recommendations. It's just not their genre. They don't care to read it. They find it boring. I have a half that do take that recommendation. But at the same time as I'm giving recommendations, I'm also listening to what they're reading. And I do pick up their books, the books that they're recommending or that they're talking about. I did that just yesterday. The teachers were talking about this new fiction book, and it's really stuck with them, and it's made them, it's been thought-provoking. And so I brought it home, and this morning I read the first 100 pages of it. So hopefully I'll have that done in a couple days, and I can hand it back to them and say, yeah, that was a decent book. So I am going in different areas with my reading. So I am experimenting. But with that said, as you can see by looking behind me, all my stuff is, or most of my stuff is nonfiction. So that is my main genre. I do think that when you are, and I was going to put this in my original video I was going to make before it was a tag, but when you're trying to help somebody become a reader, I do think it is very important to find that genre. That is, to me, the best way to get like a kid. So I'm thinking more from a teacher's perspective, but this would be the same thing for an adult. If they're wanting to become a reader, one of my first things that I say is, well, what do you like? What do you watch on TV? And, you try to get a feel for what their genre is, or, with me, I'm with the kids all day, and I kind of get a feel for what they like. I know my sports kids. I know my serious readers who like fantasy, and some of them like science, and some, I get a feel for that. And then as I do that, I start suggesting books to them. Hey, have you tried? And that tends to be very, very successful. And I have seen kids who stereotypically would not have been a reader per se. And once we, meaning me, like the language arts teachers, once we figured out where their genre was, their reading took off. So I think one of the keys to becoming a good reader is finding your niche. I'm not saying you have to stay within that niche, but initially, just to get going, to make it a habit, to enjoy it, you got to find your niche. And so, we've had some of the boys who, I don't like reading books. I haven't read a book in 3 years, or, something like that. And then you hand them, they like animals. You find out they're a farm kid that likes animals, and you hand them Sounder, or you hand them, I'm going blank on books, but like animal books, and it catches them. Or you hand them Gary Paulson books, and all of a sudden they're reading all the Gary Paulson books. That is so much fun to see, and I think that is a key when you're developing as a reader, is finding your genre. And as veteran readers, we should help others find their genre. So I kind of got off the beaten path there, but hopefully that answers the question. So number 3, do you DNF, or in BookTube talk, did not finish? Do I not finish books? And it says, if yes, what was the last book you DNF'd and the reason why? And if your answer is no, then what drives you to finish the book? I primarily do not DNF books. I'm kind of bullheaded. Once I get into a book and I've put the time in, I'm going to finish the thing. I'm always pretty dead set on that. It is a very rare exception that I DNF a book. So for me, I guess the last, when I start thinking about books that I've DNF'd, and Steve Donoghue in his video made a good point that there's different ways to look at DNFing. DNF can mean you're just never ever coming back to that book. You've gotten rid of it. It's out of your life, out of sight, out of mind. And then there's also putting a bookmark in it and putting it aside and coming back to it later. And I kind of agree with him that putting the bookmark in it and putting it aside is not necessarily the same thing. That's more of a pause in your reading. And I do that a lot, where I'll have a book that I'm either frustrated with, or maybe my mind's just not in the right place for that book. That happens a lot because I tend to be a mood reader. And so I'll put a bookmark in it, put it aside. an example of that, William Safire's the book Freedom, Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, and Abraham Lincoln. I can't remember the exact subtitle, but that book, it's like a 1,400-page book. And I started that, I bet it was over 10 years ago. That would be my guess. It was probably over 10 years ago. And I got, 300 or 400 pages in, put a bookmark in it because I had things going on in life and my mind was not focused on the book. I put it back on the shelf. And recently I made the conscious decision, I'm going to finish that monster, that 1,400-page book. I'm going to, power my way through it. And it's a really good book. So it's not like it's hard. It's just originally my mind was not in the right place. And so I've been going through that. And as soon as I'm done with Bruce Catton here, that book's going to come off my nightstand from my nightly reads, and it's going to become my morning read because I'm going to put a focus on that. And so I would not count that necessarily as a DNF. I know some people do because you haven't finished it, but I do plan to come back to it. And like I said, since I'm a mood reader, I do that a lot. If we was to look on these bookshelves, there's a handful of them we could find bookmarks in where I'd started it and then put it aside for later. I know one example is Memoirs of My Life about John Fremont. That's one I started. I read the first 20 pages or so one evening because I just pulled it off the shelf and felt like reading, and it looked interesting. I'm going to come back to that. Now, books that I have out of sight, out of mind, there's only within the last, I've been on BookTube I'm coming up on my 3rd anniversary this January, and I think there's only been 2 books in the last almost 3 years that I have DNF'd permanently. Maybe 3 books, 2 to 3 books. So you're talking about 1 book a year, if that. And the only reason I DNF'd it was, one was about, what was it about? It was American Revolution, and it wasn't a really big book, but it was in my opinion, it was a poorly done book. I didn't necessarily, it wasn't in my, it wasn't from my point of view. Not that I don't read, and I'm going to come back to that. I do read books about that go outside of my point of view, but this one, I just think it was very poorly done. It was extremely boring, and I just don't think it was a very good book. And so I DNF'd it, got rid of it. I read the first couple chapters, and I was really, really struggling. And it was on the Revolution, and I really enjoy reading about the Revolution, and I don't want to be bored. And this one bored me so much, and it was, in my opinion, so poorly done. And that's from the writing and the publishing side of it. The book was a cheaply made book, you could tell. And I just got rid of it. I quit trying. And then I had the other 1 or 2 books, because I can't remember I know one of them for sure, and the second one might have been a few years ago that I did it. But the storyline went down a path that I just didn't think I should be reading. It was a little too morally risque, a little too morally wrong, and I felt dirty reading it. So, and I know some people wouldn't care and they'd power through it, and more power to you. That's your choice. For me, I was just like, this is a little too trashy for me, and I didn't care for it. So I got rid of the book and didn't finish it. And I don't plan on going back and finishing it because it just wasn't for me. So I don't know if that answered the question. Do I DNF? I typically don't, but there have been a couple instances where I have. All right, so question number 4. I'm kind of rambling. I'll try to speed this up a little bit more. Question number 4. Do you like to read challenging books? If yes, what draws you to them? If not, why do you avoid them? And again, I agree with Steve. Steve in his video, I just got done watching it, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. He was talking about it depends on what you consider challenging, and I agree. Are we talking challenging because it's challenging your point of view, or challenging because maybe it's the time period it was written in and you're just struggling to understand it? Okay, so if we're talking about struggling to understand it because of time period, so like the ancient works, I don't read those. It's way over my head. Life, for me, this is my opinion. I know there's good stuff in it. I'm not denying that. But it would take me so long to figure it out that, life's too short. I got too many other books that I can totally understand and go through. And so I have not challenged myself, and maybe that's a black mark against me, and I need to, try to fix that. And maybe I will. Maybe I'll, go outside my comfort zone, go outside into another genre there and go into the ancient works and try to pick one up. But for me, right at this moment, it is not on my radar. So like the ancient works is a challenge for me. I am not a smart enough person. It goes over my head. And so I don't try those. Now, if we're talking about challenging my point of view, I do read books. Maybe not heavily, but I do read books that challenge my viewpoint because I do think it's important to understand all sides of an equation, understand all the arguments. And so like recently I have been reading, I love the American Civil War. I love reading about it. And I primarily read books from a Union point of view. And I've been trying to go out of my way to read some stuff from a Southern point of view, just to understand that and get a better understanding of what was going on in that culture. And I know it totally differs from my perspective. And so I want to understand that, because if I'm going to teach kids about, it's better in a discussion to try to understand your opponent, because your argument's going to become better. If I'm going to teach them that, I have to practice that myself. And so that's something I've been really working on in the last few months, is trying to read stuff from another point of view. I know I've went out of my way to order, I can think of one book in particular on Lincoln, where most of the stuff I read about Lincoln is pretty much pro-Lincoln, but I went out of my way to buy a anti-Lincoln book. Now, it's one of the worst books I've ever read. I totally disagree with it, but it's good to know what that argument is and where that argument's coming from, no matter how baseless it is. Anyway, so the question was, do I read challenging books? In that perspective, I do. I try to challenge myself. And then I think sometimes reading outside your genre could be considered challenging. And so like reading science fiction and fantasy and that kind of stuff for me is a challenge, because it's not something I typically read. And I have been doing that. I've been going out of my way to do that. And I have been enjoying it. So I don't know if I could consider it a challenge anymore. So anyway, so let's see. So what draws you to them? The second part of that question, just trying to become a more intelligent person by having that other perspective and understanding where they're coming from. That would be my answer to that. And then Criminali's question that he added on to this: do you read books by authors whose views you disagree with? Actually, I just answered that. So yes, maybe not a lot, but I do go out of my way to try to read opposing viewpoints. Question number 6, and questions number 6 and 7 were from Steve Donoghue. These are questions he added. So number 6, do you clear your mind of preconceptions and biases before you start a new book, or do you go in with axes to grind? Okay, so for me, typically I don't go out and read like book reviews and all that kind of stuff, because I do want to pick up a book and be clear-minded and give it a chance. I will read the little excerpt on the back of the book just to get an idea of what the book's about, but I don't go out of my way to read a big old book review that's going to either accept it or condemn it. I don't do that just because I want to have a clear mind, clear conscience when I'm reading it. I never go in with an axe to grind. I'm not going to say, okay, so let me back up. I'm not going to say it's never happened, because that Lincoln book that I was just talking about, as I was reading it, I was probably looking for things, well, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. And that book had a lot of things that weren't right. Ideologically and historically, there was just some things that weren't true. But anyway, so maybe I did have an axe to grind just a little bit in that, but for the most part, 99% of the time, I'm not trying to, grind the axe. Number 7, do you recommend books if you end up really liking them? And if so, what form does that recommending take? Yeah, I recommend books all the time at school. When I find one that I like, I have one history teacher that I work with in particular that I will immediately go, hey, I just got done with XYZ book, and this is awesome. You need to read it, and I will definitely recommend it. And so what form does that recommending take? I'm not sure if I cannot remember. I watched the video, but I can't remember if he meant like hard copy or e-copy. I'm not sure if that's what he meant, or if he meant like sending them a book, like, or versus just saying, hey, go pick that up. I can't remember what he said in that, so I apologize. I am going to go with, ebook versus hard copy book as far as that goes. And for me, I actually recommend both. If I have the hard copy and I want them to read it, I think it'd be good for them, I'll take it to them and hand it to them. And I will even buy extra copies for my classroom so that I can recommend it to some kids that I think are ready for that level of reading, or to my fellow teachers that really like nonfiction. But I've also recommended books that to people who I know listen to audiobooks quite a bit. My mother-in-law's husband, he drives truck across the country all the time, taking stuff from here to there. And he does audiobooks the whole time he's traveling. And so I recommended Battle Cry of Freedom. He's listened to it 3 or 4 different times now, and that's a long audiobook. He loved it. He's right now working on Bruce Catton's, was it Stillness at Appomattox, or some of the Civil War stuff. I can't remember exactly which one it was he told me he was working on, but he's listened to several of them. And The Coming Fury, Never Call Retreat, what's the number 2 in that series? So the Civil War trilogy, he's been listening to those and really, really enjoying them. And so, yeah, that's I guess my recommendation. And I recommended those books knowing he was going to listen to them ebook, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're driving truck, obviously you're not going to be reading, or I hope not anyway. So I guess if I was to add questions, so I'll quickly do this. The video is getting a little long, so I'll try to be quick about this. Mine was almost tagging on to Steve Donoghue's because I had book recommendations in my head. So what was the last book you recommended? Was there a specific reason for that book? And do people come to you regularly for book recommendations? And for me, the last one that I recommended, aside from my family member, if I'm going outside my family member, the last one I recommended was to my teacher that works across the hall from me, and I recommended Nathaniel Philbrick's Mayflower, and because we were covering that in class, and he's in the class with me, and we were watching Desperate Crossing, and I just told him, I said, you got to read this. You're going to like this. It's going to go exactly with what we're talking about. And he read it within a few days. He ate it up. And so that was my reasoning for recommending is because A, I knew he would probably like it, and B, it was what we were covering in class, and it would help him to understand what we were talking about. And then, do people regularly come to me? At school, yes. My fellow teachers, they will come to me and say, hey, do you got a book on Custer's Last Stand? Do you got a book on World War II? Do you got a book on Lincoln or Washington, whatever, Theodore Roosevelt, whatever? And I'm always like, yep, hang on a minute. And then I'll go, rummage around. And if I don't have it at school, I'll bring it from my house. And then the second question, so those were all kind of one question. The second question is, what book have you had the most success in recommending? And I was trying to think of what I've had the most success in, because that's kind of a hard one just for myself. I would think that probably the one I've had the most success in, if we're talking nonfiction, might be Battle Cry of Freedom. I've had several people ask me, what's the best book you've read on the Civil War? And that's always the one I go to, by James McPherson. And I know like my family liked it, and I've had fellow teachers who liked it. And then if I'm doing fiction, it'd probably be John Jakes' The Bastard. That was a great, the Kent Family Chronicles series. That was volume 1, and that one is always a hit. I have I've had one teacher who came away and said she didn't like that because it was too, the historical fiction side of it was too historical. Like it had too much politics in it, and she doesn't like politics. But she is the only one that I have ever come across, and that was like, nope, that's not for me. Everybody else has absolutely loved it. So, you win some, you lose some, but that's probably the two books I've had the most success in recommending. And so this has been the Personal Rules for Reading tag. Again, this tag was weaponized by MJ at Reading This Life, created this open source tag. So if you do this tag, feel free to add on to it. I saw the tag form of it on Steve Donoghue's channel, and I also watched Michael K. Vaughan's original video where he brought this idea up. I watched Mark at Book Time with Elvis's response to that video, and I want to say there was a couple other responses I watched, but those are the two I had notes on as I was watching it. But anyway, that is my version, folks. So I really appreciate you, if you made it this far, taking a half hour out of your life to come listen to me ramble. Hopefully my ramble helped you. Maybe I gave you some advice that might ring true to you, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. So if you have any thoughts on these questions, you can leave comments down in the comments section. Feel free to make a video of your own. I'm not going to tag a bunch of people. Because I'm guessing this one's going to go around. So I'm not going to tag anybody, but if you feel like doing it, go ahead and do it. And hopefully I'll see that, and I'll have some time. We're kind of busy at school right now, so I haven't done as much video watching time, but hopefully I'll have some time to watch all of them. But I'll leave links to Michael K. Vaughan, Mark at Book Time with Elvis, MJ Reading This Life, and Steve Donoghue's channel. And he left the link to Criminales. I have not watched that one yet. I plan on watching that one today when I get time. So I'll leave links to all of those videos in the descriptions below. Go out and watch those. All of those booktubers are very worth watching and very worth subscribing to if you're not subscribed to them yet. They put out great content. I thoroughly enjoy listening to them. So anyway, thank you, BookTube. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all of the new subscribers and all the support. And until next time, happy reading.